You guys have been asking me to build a PC with the 2678 V3 Haswell. This is 12 cores, 24 threads, and it's some of the best price performance that the used Xeon market has to offer. And since the RTX 3070 has just been released, if you manage to get one of these around MSRP, you can make yourself a whole PC with the best of new and used for under $900. And that's exactly what we're going to be doing. Now, some of the best points of today's build is that we've got 32 gigabytes of DDR4 memory, and we couple this in with the quad channel support on this motherboard right here, and we can not only get some really good gaming performance, but it also will double down as a 4K video editing powerhouse. And I'm going to be testing this out towards the end of the video against my 3950X workstation, where I currently use that, and I want to see how much of a difference it has, where I'm going to be editing this whole video on today's build, just to tell you guys if this build is really that good price performance. Another thing I'll also do is get this 3070 and test it on a 10900K, and then compare it to this 2678 V3 to see if you're losing out on much performance and to see just how good of a value build this can really be. Now, with that out of the way, let's get this thing built up with some quality used and new parts, where we've got the 4000D here, which is coming in at $80 USD. This is the white and gray version, where they've got kind of like this yellow accent also thrown in some parts of the case. And it does look neat, but I wonder how it does perform in terms of dissipating heat. So we will check that out later. And then last of all, in terms of dissipating heat, you guys have wanted me to check out this Intel stock cooler that I got gifted to me in a used parts hunt recently that I did here on the channel. And here our PC is all done. It is finished. And there's two little problems that happened with this PC. Well, they're not really problems because we're gonna fix them right now. But the first being the cooler is pretty loud. And in order to change that, we go into the BIOS and just manually set the fan speeds down. Now, this could be bad if the cooler can't saturate all the heat with the fan speed and it overheats, but we'll find that out later. The second thing is we've got to flash a custom BIOS onto this X99 board right here in order to do the full turbo unlock. Now, one thing I've just checked for here is you can see here I've got test pilot, well, I call it testpilot.bin, because this board in particular, the machinist board, even though it's pretty cheap on AliExpress, the one drawback is that it does have two different versions, where one is an 8 megabyte version and another is a 16 megabyte version. So you can see here, the backup file I've made is the 8 megabyte version. So that's not a problem for us because we can now just move along, and we can see here I've got two different BIOSes ready, and I downloaded them from a website, a Russian website. And so the Russian guys, they know what they're doing. When it comes to X99 BIOSes, custom BIOSes, these guys know their stuff. So we've got this custom BIOS. We're gonna load this in right now and then boot to Windows and see if everything worked out okay. And the results are now in for this gaming PC right here. And first thing I'm gonna say is the value going forward with building PCs is gonna be so much better than it ever was. For instance, this PC right here, the whole PC costs less than a 2080 Ti did brand new. And we've got half the components in this build which are brand new. So I love what the value is bringing at the end of 2020. The second thing I'm going to address, of course, is people are going to say, every time I do a video now on Xeons, there's always people just comment Ryzen, 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 Ryzen. And I'm all for Ryzen. I do budget builds here on the channel with Ryzen CPUs. In fact, recently I did a $600 gaming PC with all brand new parts with a Ryzen 3 3100, and it was phenomenal value for money. And in fact, if you can afford Ryzen CPUs, go out and buy a Ryzen. They're really good. But this CPU right here, it's coming in at 80 something dollars shipped internationally. And this is one of the few Xeons that still makes sense. And in fact, a lot of the times, I'm going to be the first to admit here, in 2020, the first gen and even the second and third gen Xeons, their value and their appeal is definitely fading away, especially with the first gen stuff, which doesn't support AVX, and then the second and third generation not supporting AVX2, which is coming into effect in some of these games that we're testing. But what we're seeing right here with this CPU is performance that matches pretty well with the 3070, providing you're playing at a higher resolution, because the 1080p results here, when we look at Shadow of the Tomb Raider, it was being limited at 1080p, where the 10900K was soaring ahead. But if we start stopping it down to 1440p and then 4K, we're starting to level out the FPS even versus a 10900K. Moving over next to Horizon Zero Dawn showed that at 1080p, this was kind of following a similar trend to Shadow of the Tomb Raider, except there was one big difference here. And I actually couldn't figure this out, because when we undervolted our GPU, the FPS was a lot better at both 1080p and 1440p. And I'll add these numbers in for the graphs for you guys, where I was kind of surprised. But if we look at the undervolting on this PC, it also dropped the power consumption down from roughly 370 to 380 watts down to 300 to 310 watts. So undervolting this system, you're going to be playing games and doing all your workload with pretty much a max power consumption draw of 300 watts, which was very impressive. And then we move over to Warzone, and the FPS was very good on this game. If you had a 144 Hz monitor, you're going to get an amazing experience playing Warzone on this PC. And this was all max settings across these games that we tested here, ultra settings. The last game we tested was the Fort Nightmares update, and here the 10900K, especially at 1080p, does pull a fair few frames ahead, or actually a significant amount at 1080p. Then 1440p, it does start to dwindle out a bit, where we can see even with the 2678 V3 Xeon, the 1080p to 1440p, there was no difference in FPS. We're pretty much CPU bound at both these resolutions. So the 2678 does have a few limitations when it comes to pure gaming, where it maxes out at 3.3 gigahertz all cores. Though the 12 cores, 24 threads, and we'll show this soon because I'm going to edit the rest of this part of this video out on this PC right behind me here, it does start to do very well in things like Premiere Pro and other applications. And because we've got 32 gigabytes of RAM in this build, that'll be able to handle a 4K video edit. Now, I do like to edit with 64 gigabytes of RAM personally at 4K. I find sometimes, especially if you've got a very large amount of clips, you can come into some problems with 32 gigabytes. It's just my personal experience. But for what it's worth, we'll go through that experience very soon and keep an update for you guys. But really, when it comes down to this whole build in question, nothing was really bad. Everything worked out a-okay. The power consumption was very well controlled. Even the temperatures weren't too bad, where I'll pull up a graph here showing that the 4000D, even without undervolting the GPU, where I put the fan speeds on 100%, and I left the Xeon cooler, and we'll talk about that soon, that maxed out at 72 degrees, and then the GPU maxed out at 64 degrees with the side panel on. Taking the side panel off, it went down only 2 degrees to 70 degrees and 62 degrees respectively across the CPU and the GPU, meaning this case, even out of the box with the two 120mm fans installed, does a pretty solid job of cooling. And to quickly talk about the 4000D, Corsair did send this over and they asked me to take a look at it, and I was really surprised at not just the aesthetics, but also the build quality for 80 bucks. Really good value for money case. The temperatures and the airflow are really good even out of the box, where this one's the closed off version, which is actually not closed off at all. There's a lot of room there for air to come in. There's also a meshed version too, but I found this version of the case to just look super clean. And it's funny with Corsair, it feels like they've got two disciplines within the company. One is just full blown RGB and do whatever it takes to get LED lights going on. And then there's this other discipline, which this is what the 4000D is, where everything just is super clean and the build quality and the thoughtful planning in the case, it's just flawless. And that's what I like about this case right here. If you guys are in that market for something that's super easy to build in and just has all the bells and whistles in terms of even like a USB Type-C at the front, then this case is going to be it. I was really impressed with what this case brought to the table. Now, the cooler itself, we'll quickly talk about the Xeon cooler that you guys asked me to check out. I actually wanted to check out this thing too. This cooler wasn't that good. I mean, I got it for free, and that's probably why it's not that good, but the manual fan speeds, when I set it at 25, it just didn't cool this Xeon properly at all. When I set it at 50%, it was kind of struggling. I could see it creeping up, but then I found a happy balance between noise and temperatures at 75% manual fan speeds, where it didn't overheat, but it did take the CPU to 72 degrees. Now, I was in 28-degree ambience, so things are starting to heat up. If I do look a little bit sweaty in this video, that's because things in good old Queensland, where I'm living at the moment, it's starting to heat up. And the rest of you guys right now are probably going into winter soon, but that's just, things are upside down. You guys already know this in Australia. Or is it downside up? That is the question. But to cut things short, everything in this build checks out. And if you want to go down this route, then I can easily recommend it, except for maybe the Xeon cooler. That was it just made the cut for me personally, where I would definitely in hindsight go out and get a Snowman cooler, and it will do a much better job in terms of cooling and noise. And it'll also add a bit of bling, especially since it's got the white fan. It would match this white 4000D build perfectly. Though the last thing to talk about is the CX750M that we used today. For the money that we paid for it, it's definitely a good buy, but it's not the best power supply you can get. And in fact, when we were undervolting the RTX 3070, we did have to give it an extra 30 millivolt because the ripple suppression isn't as good as a more expensive power supply. So depending on what power supply you get, if you get a really high-end power supply with low ripple, you'll be able to take your undervolting on your RTX 3070, 3080, or if you're getting a 6800 XT, you'll be able to take it that bit lower. And speaking of the graphics cards, the RTX 3070, great value, $499 if you can get the Asus Dual at that price, which they should, I'm told they're coming into stock. By this time you see this video and between the end of the year, if you're really hunting for one of these cards, you should be able to get one by the end of the year. But the 6800 XT, I'm looking forward to that a lot as well. I think the graphics card market is really shaking things up, where those older flagship cards are just not worth it. And in hindsight, we could see that they were very overpriced compared to what's coming out at the end of this year, where the value propositions of these new cards is looking really good. So I can't wait to check out the 6800 XT, but in the meantime, if you get a 3070, you have definitely, or you will definitely not be making a bad choice. Anyways, we're gonna jump across to this 12 core right here, edit this video out, and then come back with a question of the day. Let's see how this thing performs. So finishing up editing on this PC, things were surprisingly better than the last time I edited on the 2678 V3. So maybe Adobe are finally getting optimizations right. And this is something that I have noticed on a particular CPU that's coming out next month. But you gotta stay tuned for that review because we'll talk about that later. But for what it's worth, PC we've got here, phenomenal value for money. If you can afford a bit more, then of course go with a bit more. But if you've just got 900 bucks and you want some of the best value for money in terms of a PC that'll double down as a workstation and will play games, and it's got a pretty good feature set and it doesn't use up a whole lot of power, then this one is definitely going to be one worth considering. One more good thing, especially about the CPU, the RAM, and the motherboard, is that you can get these for worldwide shipped prices that we've mentioned in the video here. So that means anyone even living in some place in Iceland, well, wait, not probably not Iceland, but some place that I guess prices are higher than what they would be in the USA or Australia, for example, you can get a better deal than getting ripped off locally. So that's one good thing about the three components here in that bare bones portion. One more amazing piece of news is that we've got the RTX 3080. Our pre-order has come through, so the next video will be the $100 flip up challenge. We're gonna get that going again. And I will say, if you're in the market for a 3070 or a 3080 or a 3090, you just have to be on the ball. I'd say a lot of the major retailers are all booked out with orders, but even then I did see 3090s coming into stock at Australian retailers even right now at, I guess, decent prices in terms of what eBayers are charging versus what the retailers are charging, where Sculptech had one for 2,700 Aussie dollars. So that's like, you can just buy that right now to get shipped to you. So they are getting, the stock will get alleviated as time goes on. And I got a comment in about a 3070, someone paying 1,500 Aussie dollars for it. I mean, if you're happy with that, sure, but I wouldn't pay that personally for a 3070, knowing that they will be, or at least they are being sold for around 1,000 Aussie dollars. Like, that's what the person who I got this pre-order off said that they were getting him in for and selling them. And so $1,500 does feel a little bit too steep on that 3070 purchase, my man. But other than that, we've got the question of the day, which asks about the Logitech G3. Now, this is a mouse that I used 10 years ago, and it was pretty much discontinued, and they don't make the G3 anymore. Then there was this period where they didn't really make a mouse that succeeded it. But nowadays, if you're in the market for a Logitech G3, I would just suggest getting a G102 or a G203, and they can be had for even 20 bucks shipped internationally, where they've got a better sensor on them, and of course they've been updated. So there's no point getting the G3, even though I still have two of them in my studio here today. One of them is actually used for the input latency tests that I do in the input latency videos, which is that bare bones cut down mouse, because the shell broke and the main core of the mouse was still okay. So I used that for latency testing. Then I got another one upstairs, which is just a spare one that honestly, the mouse is sentimental to me, but there are better models out there. So if you are sentimental, then you can look for one on the used market, but you will be paying quite a bit. Anyway, hope that answers that question. And if you guys have stayed this far and you're enjoying that content, then please hit that like button for us. Also, if you want to see the tech videos the moment they drop, then don't forget to hit that sub button and ring that bell. And also, if you have any questions about today's build, then drop a comment in the question in the comment section below, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. And with that aside, I'll see you next time. Peace out for now. Bye.